Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me on this Thursday, April 7th in the Locker Room. I'm Alan Locher. Chris Bruno is well known to daytime television audiences for his role as Dennis Wheeler on Another World and for his groundbreaking story on All My Children as Michael Delaney, a gay high school teacher who loses his job to social prejudice. The All My Children writing team won the Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing Team for telling that groundbreaking story. Chris relocated to the West Coast where he was discovered doing stand-up comedy by a Warner Brothers executive, and he subsequently was cast on Suddenly Susan, The Nanny, Jessie, and had a recurring role on Alan Ball's series, The War at Home, Oh Grow Up. In 1998, he and his brother Dylan Bruno were cast in Lorenzo Carcaterra's, if I pronounced that right, New York cop show The Forest for the WB. He was also cast as Walt Bannerman in Stephen King's The Dead Zone, which ran for 6 seasons. In 2004, he produced and starred in the feature film Last of the Romantics, working alongside his brother once again. He also appeared in the feature film The World's Fastest Indian, opposite Sir Anthony Hopkins. Chris has had guest starring and recurring roles on several primetime series, including Numbers, Prison Break, Castle, Southland, ABC's Family Tools, ABC Family's The Fosters, to name just a few. He also starred in the feature film A Remarkable Life, in which he and Dylan played actual brothers for the first time. And in 2017, Chris made his professional debut as an MMA fighter. It is my pleasure to welcome Chris Bruno, Locker Room. Hey, Chris.
Alan, how you doing? Nice to see you.
You too. Thanks so much for doing this, and thank you to our mutual friend Susan Eisenberg for connecting us.
Yes, a big shout out to Susan. Good friend of mine and a great voiceover talent, man. She is one of the top right now.
Wonder Woman for sure.
Wonder Woman. I said to my wife, she said, "How are you doing this interview?" I said, "Oh, Wonder Woman hooked me up with it." So she's like, "Oh, I see your past, is following you around, dating Wonder Woman." I said, "We didn't date. She's just a friend of mine." She's like, "Oh, okay." But that's good that Wonder Woman hooked you guys up. That's awesome.
I love that. Well,
yeah.
you grew up back east in Connecticut with your brother Dylan. What was your childhood like back east?
You know, we grew up in a small beach community in Milford, Connecticut, which is a very blue collar kind of hardworking, town. But we were 60 miles outside of New York City, and my dad was in the city trying to be an actor, and so he had his own apartment and all that. And then eventually my parents got divorced, and I would go and visit my dad on the weekends in New York and just fell in love with New York City and all that it had to offer. It was pretty amazing place. And so I had the nice, quiet, small town life in Connecticut, but I had, access to the big city as well. So it was kind of cool, really neat balance.
Is your dad sort of what influenced you and your brother on following, the acting path?
It's interesting because my dad always struggled with it. He did a lot of plays. He did off Broadway. I grew up on the opera and the ballet. He worked at the Metropolitan Opera House in Lincoln Center. So we would always have tickets to the opera. He'd, stuff us in a seat where somebody didn't show up or whatever. And then we go to the ballet. So I had, the exposure in New York City to, all of the arts and everything else. But I also just loved the diversity of New York City. It was so different. It's like, here we are in this world today, right? We're struggling to get our head around transgender rights and all this, these different things. For me, it was 1976. I'm just going to be very honest about this. I was sitting in a pizza place with my dad, Vinny's Pizza. And I said, "Dad, that girl's got a really deep voice." And he goes, "That's not a girl, son." And I said, "Yeah, it is. She's got boobies." And he goes, "All right, let me explain something to you. Some people are born a certain way where they don't feel the same way on the inside that they do on the outside. There's things that they can do to make themselves feel more like they do on the inside, on the outside. And they can have surgeries. They can do some hormone therapy." And I go, "Dad, why would anybody want to do that?" And he goes, "I don't know, son. I don't know why people do half the things they do." Ooh, pizza. And that was the end of the conversation. In 1976, I knew that there were trans people that lived in my neighborhood, and they were, and they would say, they'd wave to my dad and he'd say good morning and hello. And I was like, oh, that was the end of that. It just wasn't a big deal. And that's what I loved about New York City. It's like everybody, was able to be themselves and not be judged for it. Whereas in my little small town that I grew up in, Connecticut, it was very, very different.
It's amazing, if you just have a conversation and just sort of speak the truth. It's not, you're not, promoting anything. You're just educating someone about other people.
That's what I feel is today is that it's so difficult for people to just have conversations. Why can't we just talk about this stuff, and just sit down and say, I don't really understand this, or, well, help explain to me. And I feel social media and the pandemic, has really drawn us further apart in a lot of ways, because, when you sit around a table and you talk to people, you realize that your needs are all pretty similar. But when you're online, you can just shoot proverbial spitballs at each other with no consequence. We've really grown apart that way. And I feel we need to have these conversations. They're difficult. They're not easy for everybody. And I know a lot of my friends, they were struggling. Their oldest kid was trans, and they were like, oh my God, how do I handle this? I don't know what to do. And there's support groups. There's people that you can talk to. There's a lot of different things to understand that about things that you may not understand yourselves. And I think that's where we kind of have to move more toward that as a society, to start having conversations again and not being so offended if somebody doesn't get it or understand it,
But I just love that your dad did that. It's just sort of the natural way we should educate all our children,
Yeah, and it was a very simple conversation. It was in 1976. I was 10 years old, and I asked. It was just something that I was like, I noticed that was different, and I didn't understand it, and I asked him about it, and I thought, in this day and age, that's a pretty good, explanation for all those years ago to have this
19, yeah. In the 70s, to have an honest conversation with your son when he asks you a question like that, that's pretty impressive of your dad.
Yeah, and my dad is, he's very open to everything. I grew up around the gay community. He's always said in the Upper West Side, Manhattan, saved by the gay community. They opened up shops and restaurants, and it was a kind of a crappy place to live in the 60s and early 70s. But he said it really started to change, and that was like a big thing, is that we were this kind of progressive neighborhood, the Upper West Side,
Yeah. New York, nothing like New York City. I agree completely.
I know. I do like my life in LA, though, that's for sure, but I miss New York sometimes.
Well, looking outside at the rainy weather here, I bet California is not looking like New Jersey is today. So
yeah. No, I surfed yesterday morning, and it's almost 100 today. So it's yeah, it was hot yesterday. When I was driving home from the beach, I was like, man, it's hot in the valley today. So it was 100.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So in your sophomore year of college, you were sidelined with an injury and auditioned for a play, Machiavelli's The Mandrake, and were cast as the lead. Can you talk about the decision to audition for that and what it was like?
Yeah, I was going through. I had this injury. I had a lot of injuries. I played 3 sports in college. I skied on a ski team. I played tennis, but I also transferred to Stony Brook in Long Island and played 3 years of college baseball there as well. So I was very active in sports, but I ended up having this injury and couldn't ski for a couple of months. And I just thought, if I just sit around and drink and party like everybody else, this is not going to go well. So I saw a little flyer that said auditions for a play. And I said, man, I always kind of wanted to do a play. I grew up around the theater. I watched my dad do it. My uncle was involved in the business. And I thought, what the hell? You're supposed to try everything in college. So I auditioned, and I got the lead role, Calamaco, which is opened with a 3-page monologue. I was running around in tights and like a little, change purse and a feather in my cap, and and I was in over my head. I'll never forget opening night. I walked down the stage and I had this 3-page monologue. And I was like, the first point is this, Ciro. And I said, the first point. I said, and the second point is, and then I was like, I literally just went blank on my lines, couldn't remember. And I was like, and I'm like, what's the third point, Ciro? And I smacked him in the head with a rubber chicken. It's like, I don't know, master. I thought you knew the third point, whatever. And somehow we just, missed about a page and a half of dialogue and just picked right up and somehow pulled it off, and nobody noticed. And I remember being backstage when we finished that show, came out, took our bows, and I went, that was the most intense thing I've ever done in my life. I want to do that again. That was cool. It was like adrenaline filled. And, I was a psychology major at the time. And I just thought, this is a lot cooler than psychology. So I changed my major and transferred schools and decided to pursue it professionally. And my dad thought I was nuts. He was like, this is a miserable effing business, is what he said. He said, I don't know why you want to get involved in it. And I said, well, I feel like I want to give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, I'll do something else. 30 years later, I'm still doing it. So it worked out okay.
Do you remember what was the first thing you got that he was like, okay, I guess you made the right choice?
The first thing that I got was a Budweiser commercial. And my grandfather, who was my greatest influence, kind of an Italian immigrant and self-made man, I'd always look up to him. And he got tears in his eyes when he said he saw that commercial air during the World Series and the Super Bowl, and it was all over the place. And he said, grandson, this is I think this means something to you, that it was like the red badge of courage, Stephen Crane's or the Wizard of Oz, all the things you think that you need, you already have, but sometimes you need a little reminder. And I think that first commercial that I was in college and I was getting paid as a professional actor. I would get checks in the mail for like $2,700 as a college kid and be like, we're having a keg tonight. And I'd go pick it up and, and I was putting my money away because I was in college. I didn't need it. And it was cool. And I feel like that was the moment everybody kind of went, he said he was going to be on TV someday. There he is. And, I was still bartending and all that stuff. But that was
a Budweiser commercial. A Budweiser commercial is pretty cool. But then a Budweiser commercial in the World Series is even cooler.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. What happened is it was the game that there was the earthquake, and so they had postponed the World Series. So I've had this really interesting history with my television debut. So that was my TV debut, and they postponed the World Series, so they didn't air it. But then after the earthquake, then it was like, oh, they're actually going to play it. So now everybody was watching the World Series, and then it aired, so it got a lot of airtime then. And then my debut on Another World was when they announced the fall of the Soviet Union that day. So they preempted my first air date with the fall of the Soviet Union, of like just running across the TV, like Russian, and then interviewing everybody about it. So like, we'll air his thing tomorrow. So I don't know what it is with world events in my TV debuts, but it's been
seriously. And
right?
Those are two pretty big, events.
And then with the way back with the Ben Affleck movie, our premiere was the first week that they announced coronavirus. Don't go to the movies. Don't go out. We're like, wait a minute, stop. Hold on. We're premiering this weekend on Friday. And they were like, no, don't go to the movies. So very interesting times with my timing of my debut.
That's crazy. Well, you said you transferred to Stony Brook. What was the experience like there?
For me, it was great.
Especially studying theater.
Well, I was studying theater, but I was also on the baseball team. So the baseball players thought I was like this theater freak. They're like, oh man, Bruno's like one of those crazy theater freaks. And then the theater freaks all thought I was a jock. They'd show up in my dirty baseball uniform. I'd be like on the mound with the bases loaded. And like, they're like, Bruno, don't you have rehearsal in 10 minutes? I'm like, yup. And I literally strike out the side, run across the campus in my uniform with dirt all over it. And I'd show up, and then I'd be like with the director being like, okay, we're going to warm up and we're going to breathe. And I'm like, bro, I'm so warm. Let's just go. I'm ready to rehearse. So it was kind of an interesting dichotomy of being this kind of jockey dude doing the theater stuff, but also, and again, I played a gay character I did Pfeiffer's People, And that was Carol Churchill would always mess with gender identity back in the day. She would have the actors played by women played by males purposely and vice versa. And so I had to kiss a guy in this thing, and it was unbelievable because I knew I was kind of struggling with it. Of course, I was, a straight male, and like, oh my God, the whole baseball team's coming opening night. I lived with 8 football players, and so the director calls me the night before. It was 1 week in rehearsal. He said, now you have to kiss Jeff, who was the guy playing opposite me. And he's like, if you don't do it, we're going to replace you. And I was like, oh, shit, what am I going to do? So the night before, Jeff calls me up and he's like, yeah, I'm kind of having a tough time about this tomorrow. How are you doing about it? And I said, I don't know. It's a little tough for me, but I think we'll be okay. He's like, yeah, I think we're good. So we get there. We have this, to that point in the scene when we actually kiss, and of course everybody stops and starts clapping and like, yeah, Bruno, you did it, whatever. I was like, oh my God, I was all embarrassed and everything. But I was like, all right, we did it. When we open, we're going to be fine. We opening night, we're backstage, we're having a little cast party. And then I was like, yeah, man, I'm so happy that, Jeff called me the night before. And like, felt like he was struggling with it too. And they're like, Jeff, are you kidding me? Jeff's gay. And I was like, he is. I was like, Jeff, you little shit, you didn't tell me you were gay. And he's like, I am, sorry, just letting you know. And I was like, oh my God, you guys totally set me up, called me to tell me you were struggling with it. He's like, yeah, I'm not really struggling with it. But the whole baseball team sat in the front row. And when I did, they were like, ooh, they were all making noises.
But still, what year was that?
That was 1987, I think it was.
That's still pretty,
But they all were like, good for you, Bruno, man. You got a set of balls, man. I got to give you that much, And I could see like the little baby steps of, when it was like the soap when I was on All My Children. They broke the story through the National Enquirer. It literally said, actor Bruno gay, and it had a picture of me on the beach,
of course,
with a football in my hand with my shirt off and my hat on backwards, and then you go on to read the actor Chris Bruno, who plays Michael Delaney, will be revealed that his character is gay. And I went to a bachelor party with 35 of my guy friends back in Connecticut. And the story had just broken, and I showed up from New York, drove back there, and they're like, oh, Bruno, come sit next to me. And they're giving me a bunch of crap. But at the same time, they went, yeah, we work with this guy. He's gay, he's cool. He don't bother nobody. Like, that's like the baby steps that I was seeing back then of like, okay, what? These guys are cool with it, and they're getting it,
But, for Jeff even, I graduated college in 88, and I really was not out until, I knew, but, it was not easy. I struggled. 89, 90, I started having a new group of friends, but like telling people, like, it's pretty impressive that Jeff was, that people knew so openly.
It's really hard, and my brother and I, when we first came to LA, we had a friend that we modeled with, and this guy Rob, and he was like, one night they were following me in the car. We didn't have cell phones back then, and I was like, where the hell is my brother? They must have gotten lost or something. And then finally they came walking in, and I was like, where the hell were you guys? And they're like, well, we were talking. And I'm like, about what? And and Rob, his face was just flushed with red, and he kind of bent down and got down on his knees, literally, and said, we were talking of that, I've been with men, he said, and I'm like, oh yeah, we figured you were gay, Rob. And he's like, you did, Jesus, you did too? Yeah, we were like, yeah, we figured that much, and he was like, I thought I was getting away with it. And he's like, I just didn't want to be dishonest with you guys anymore. If a pretty girl walked by and we're like, you guys are like, oh, wow, she was cute, or whatever. He's like, I didn't want to feel like I was deceiving you guys anymore. And then he said, wait a minute, do you still want to go to Palm Springs with us this weekend? And I was like, of course we do. Yes, you're our friend. And he was like, oh shit, God, thank God. And he was like so relieved. He was physically, shaken by having to tell us this, thinking that he might lose his friendship with me and my brother because he was coming out to us as gay. We were like, no, we pretty much suspected that, Rob. He was like just mortified that we actually knew, but he was also so relieved that he was able to now. And then he really, his gay side really came out. We played golf that weekend. It was really funny. I was like, yeah, okay, now you can see it. We finally get to be yourself, Rob. That's awesome. But it was a weight off of his chest in a way that I could see it viscerally affecting him, you know?
I completely relate, and the same thing told my best girlfriend. She's like, thank God they knew. But you mentioned baseball. You broke records with the speed of your baseball, no?
Yeah, so, I played baseball as a kid. My grandfather, I threw his shoes in the pool when I was a year old, and he said, for crying out loud, that kid better do something with that arm. So, and my mother used to work with me in the backyard. My mother played softball into her 40s before she finally broke her wrist doing a head first dive into second base and was like in a cast. And it's like, that's it, I'm done. I have stuff I got to do. But she would teach me to throw a curveball in the backyard and had a catcher's mitt and a mask and everything. She coached our little league team. We won the city championships and all that. And then what happened is that I went to Johnson State, which is a small school in Vermont, and they had a ski team. And I was like, oh, well, I thought they had a baseball team, but they said, no, we don't have a team. It's a club. And then I got there and there was like no baseball team. So I didn't play for 2 years and I missed it. But I was also a skinny little kid growing up, and now I was in college and put on some size. And when I transferred to Stony Brook, I went and saw a college baseball game one weekend. And I thought, man, if this is college, I know I can play on this level. So I was a walk-on at Stony Brook, and the coach said, well, what position do you play? I said, I'm a pitcher. And he looked behind him and he said, see that depth chart? That's all the pitchers that we have. They've been recruited from all over the country. What makes you think you can play baseball on our team? When was the last time you played baseball? I said, I haven't picked up a baseball in 2 years. And he said, well, I can't guarantee you're going to make the team. He said, you're a pitcher. That's good, but you're a right-hander. We need left-handed pitching. So I came out and he gave me 3 innings against Suffolk Community College. I was in my cutoff jeans and wife beater T-shirt and hat on backwards and went out and pitched 3 innings. I was less than impressive, but I didn't give up any runs or anything else. And he's like, well, you can come. This is the last fall game. You can come to spring training. That winter, I worked out all winter. I hit the gym. I did everything. And then I went to spring training, and he gave me 3 innings against Boston College. And I struck out the first 3 guys. And the catcher, this guy Felix, he was Dominican. And he goes, look at my hand. It's swollen, man. He goes, you're throwing 90 miles an hour, bro. He's like, and your ball is moving, man. And literally the coach was like, where did you come from, dude? I was like, I don't know. I always had an arm, but I was always a little small and skinny kid. And all of a sudden I was throwing 90 miles an hour plus. And I set records in the school my senior year. We finished in the first place in school's history. I led the league in strikeouts and games pitched and wins my senior year. And those records held until this young and upcoming pitcher, Joe Nathan, who signed a $100 million contract with the Minnesota Twins, broke a bunch of my records. And I was like, who is this kid? And then he became, a perennial all-star and all that. And I was like, oh, wow. So,
did you ever consider pursuing it?
I did. And actually, I had scouts come to 2 of those games, and I got offered to go to the St. Louis Cardinals training camp. And I was all excited because I was like, oh my God, I want to play professional baseball. This is it. This is my chance. And that was the week that I got Another World. I literally was 25 years old, and they called and they said, yeah, they want to sign you to a 2-year contract. They're going to write a role for you. I had auditioned for another character to play like a sensitive photographer. And they're like, nah, he's not really that, but we like him. And so they said it's going to take 2 months to develop. So if I look back, I would have made $600 a month, which is what you would get playing in single A ball back in the day and trying to make it to the big leagues. And at 25, I had a 6-figure income on a soap opera. I was like, well, that decision got made. But I kept playing in these adult leagues all the way until I was 44 years old. I played in these leagues. So I loved it.
And I didn't realize. So Dennis Wheeler was created for you.
Yeah. They decided to bring back Dennis Carrington Dennis Carrington Wheeler, there was 2 other guys that had played it throughout history, and they decided that, hey, let's just make him this skydiving, race car driving, bungee jumping, world-renowned art dealer, because I speak fluent French, so they would write scenes that I would speak French and stuff. And they would do it. They will, it was a soap opera, so there's only so much you can do in a studio. But they would bring in like a Ferrari, and I'd bring Marley Jensen Buchanan, was my love interest on the show. Yeah, and we'd make out in the thing or whatever, and they would do island getaways, and people were like, it's in your contract that you have to take your shirt off every week. I'm like, it's not in my contract. They just asked me to do it 3 or 4 times a week, but that's okay. I don't mind. I just stay in shape anyway. So
when you auditioned, did you have to screen test with anybody?
I did. I screen tested against 11 guys. And I forget what his name was. The character was Sam, something Green. Brian Green, I think it was. He played the character, but there was 11 of us that I tested against. And so I thought it was really a long shot to get this thing anyway. And so when they actually called and said, I was supposed to audition for Loving. I actually auditioned for Loving, the show Loving, which became The City or whatever I think they called it, for a season or 2. They wanted to test me, and my agent was really smart and called back over and said, hey, if you really like Chris as much as you said you did, he's supposed to test for Loving tomorrow, and if he gets it, he's gone. So they said, we're in a production meeting right now. We'll call you in an hour when we get out. And they called him. They said, yeah, sign him to a 2-year deal. We'll write a role for him. It was like one of those miracles where I literally fell on the floor when I got the phone call. It was like, oh my God, I'm really going to be doing this. I'm actually going to make money as an actor. Holy crap, this is so cool.
And then made money for not working for 2 months.
Yes, exactly. So my brother and I went on a cross-country trip. We literally loaded up the car with parachutes and mountain bikes and everything we could, went on an extreme adventure for 2 months. And they're like, don't get killed before you come back home. So, there was a time we were climbing this mountain, and I didn't think I was going to make it back down. At one point, I got myself stuck up there, and he was like filming. My brother's like, well, can't start something and not finish it. And he's giving me crap. He's like, it's a great attitude in life, but when you're on a cross-country trip, it'll get you into trouble. And I was stuck, and I finally found this handhold and made it up. And I was like, had this moment where I was like, I got the greatest job of my life, and I'm not even going to make it there. I'm going to die before I get there. But we had a ball going cross-country.
Do you remember your first day on set at Another World?
Oh, I did. I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. Like, I'll never forget that feeling of being like, oh my God, I did it. I'm here. But now there's 3 cameras going, and they have these big cameras on daytime that they wheel around and they go live. And when the red light comes on, that's your camera that's looking at you. And I just remember feeling like so nervous and terrified and feeling like they're going to fire me any minute, knowing that I'm an imposter and, I'm not really any good at this stuff or whatever. And eventually, I settled in and I loved it. It was really hard because the soap, you have so many lines and people are like, how do you learn your lines so fast? Even my wife, she's like, I can look at 8 pages of dialogue for a self-tape and within 12 minutes, I know the whole thing. And she's like, how do you do it? I said, the brain's a muscle,
Still today, you can do that.
I can still do it. Yeah. I think it was because All My Children was the most amount of dialogue. Because playing a school teacher, I also had to give lectures, and it had to be historically based. I couldn't say, in 1772, our country became, or it's like, no, it's 1776, and all those numbers and names and dates and everything else I had to memorize. And I think that's just really just broke me in, where I realized the belief in yourself, right? What the mind can conceive, can achieve. If you believe it, now I look at it, I'm like, this, you got this, you can figure this out. I'll get one sentence that's always like a kind of trips you up or whatever, but that one I just spend a little extra time on, and I usually get it. So
that's great.
Yeah,
that's
it's
great.
Fun.
Can you talk about Carmen Duncan playing your mom?
Oh my God, we used to laugh because it was like the Oedipal, complex over there with Carmen because she was so hot. And I was always be like, oh my God, Carmen, you are on fire, you know. And I was a young kid at the time. I was 25 years old, and God, she must have been in her 40s at the time, maybe even 50s. And I thought, God, man, what a beautiful woman. She was always so sweet to me. She really took me under her wing, was like protected me, like this is my guy, you know, that I'm going to look out for. And I always loved Carmen. She really, that's it's just a name. When you say that to me, I was like, oh my God, Carmen, so good to me. The people that were good to me, it was really funny. I actually ran into Jensen Buchanan at a little coffee shop out here, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, I'm so sorry I was mean to you. I said, you weren't mean to me. You were mean one day. It was one day I had knee surgery. I came in, I had blown my knee out skiing, and they had to write it in because I had to have surgery. And I was on crutches, and I was like on painkillers. And that one day I was having trouble memorizing my lines. And she was playing two characters, not one, but two. She did the Dickie Marley thing.
Yeah.
So she was like, one day she was like, oh my God, do you know your lines or do you not? And I was like, I'm sorry, I forgot. I was like, two Vicodins or something at the time. And I was like, and she was like, I'm so sorry. I said, no, you had such a heavy workload, but we had a lot of fun together. And Jensen and I too. She was a great love interest for me. And that whole idea of like a love interest was weird because you're making out on TV and, you know, it's all supposed to be make believe, but you're still kind of going through the motions of doing it. So
What I, love that she sort of remembered that how many years later and brought that up.
yeah, and I was like, are you kidding? My whole experience with you was nothing but positive. I said, I know we're all allowed to have a bad day. I was the one actually having a bad day, for her. And I'll just remember, we were supposed to be doing this like island getaway, and it was like, we went to Jamaica or something. Of course, it's in the studio, and we're supposed to be having these romantic scenes, and I'm like, eat on crutches, moving around. It was kind of comedy.
Crazy. And what else? Tom Eplin and Judy Evans you worked with as well, right?
I just ran into Tommy at Ralph's, I don't know, 6 months ago. And I was like, oh my God. And we had masks on and also a la Karat. Literally both of them at the Ralph's in Studio City. And Ala had a mask on too. And she was like, walked by, and we kind of like had a double take. And she's like, wait a minute, Bruno? And she's like, is that you? And I'm like, oh my God, Ala, it is you. How the hell did we recognize each other 20 years later? We used to keep in touch when we first came to LA, but Tommy Eplin's a pilot. He had 3 airplanes when we were on the show. So he was the one that like took me up and got me interested in aviation. Didn't realize all these years later, I would become a helicopter pilot. And so we were like, dude, we got to get together and go fly. So we literally just exchanged numbers. I'm going to call him to tell him that I just got my first helicopter job. I'm actually going to be paid as a helicopter pilot
Is he really the reason you did it? Like,
yeah, I really, Tommy just inspired me. And he said, I run it as a business. He said, it's my second business. I buy planes and I lease them out, to make extra money. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. He would call me up. He's like, yeah, Bruno, you want to go play golf down in Myrtle Beach today? I'm like, today? He's like, yeah, come to Teterboro in Jersey. He had his plane at Millionaire there, and I would go meet him there. We'd jump in the plane, throw our golf clubs in the storage compartment, rip down there, have a limo pick us up, go play golf, jump back in the plane, and be home in time for dinner.
Crazy. I grew up 10 minutes from Teterboro.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to reach out to you when we're off air because I would love to reconnect with him. I worked with Tommy on As the World Turns, and I know fans would love to see him.
Oh my God. He was another mentor for me because he also took me under his wing, and he'd give me like little pointers and stuff. And I always respected that about Tommy. Of course, we'd always goof around on set, and Tommy and I were the worst. Like, they're like, oh my God, you two, the two of you guys doing this. We're always up to something.
Opposite sides of the studio. And you worked at the studio in Brooklyn, right?
Yes, we did, which was always interesting. That was back in the day when the business was the golden years. They would send a stretch limo to pick us up in the morning, drive us out to Brooklyn. And I'd be like, I don't really need all this. Like, I could just as easily, take the train out there or whatever. But they would send a limo for us, drive us there, get, back in a limo. we would do these personal appearances where we'd go sign autographs in a mall for 2 hours and make $5,000 or something like that. It was awesome. And then we just go and play golf, you know, or whatever activities you wanted to do that weekend because they'd fly us in. So yeah, Judy, I have like old video footage of me, Tommy, and Judy and Judson Mills on an airplane in first class, like misbehaving terribly. But it was really fun days of like thinking about all that. And again, that's the one thing about social media that I do like, is I still, a lot of the people from the soaps I keep in touch with via social media, you know.
It's a great way to connect. What do you think you learned in those 2 years that you took to All My Children and to everything else that you have done since?
The first thing that I learned from All My Children, I think, is that
no, I mean from your 2 years on Another World that you took, you know, working your first time on a set that you took everywhere else.
I think that I learned that, again, you can do anything if you put your mind to it, because I was really nervous when I first started and I was not great. And I look back at some of those days and I was like, I was pretty new. But I realized that to trust myself, and that it's not, you know, it's not like, oh, this just happened and you're going to get fired. You know, you're not an imposter. I was like, no, you're an actor and you can make a living doing this. And I think I've carried that in. And even to these days where you know, things have gotten really challenging in the last 5 or 6 years for us as actors. When we get paid, we don't get paid as much when we work. You know, the residual structure is not the same. But I feel like you just never give up. You just stay in it. And people are like, I can't believe you're still doing it after all these years. I have a lot of my friends that were on soaps that aren't even actors anymore. They're not even in the business, you know. And for me, that gave me, again, that red badge of courage to say, hey, you got this. You're going to do this, man. You're going to be on TV and you're going to make money. You're going to make a living as an actor. And even if you're not working momentarily, I had it with Malcolm Jamal Warner recently. I was down and went to go visit him in Atlanta. He's on a show, The Resident, down there. And he and his girl, his daughter, you know, and I said, you know, I don't know. I just feel like the business isn't buying what I'm selling right now. And he goes, not that the business isn't buying what you're selling. He said, it's cyclical and you're on the wrong end of the cycle. That's all it is. It's going to come back around. And when it does, you're going to be so busy. And it was literally a week later I got home and I booked 2 movies in one day and a helicopter and a job flying helicopters up in Washington State. So I just got back from Albuquerque doing the first movie. I start stunt rehearsals this Saturday on the next one, and we shoot, and then I wrap, and then I go fly helicopters, drying cherries in Washington State for a couple months, and then come back. So I'm busy again. Who'd have thought? And I think I took that from, you know, my time on Another World, that, hey, you got this, man. You know, the business likes you. Even though it doesn't feel that way sometimes.
Drying cherries?
Drying cherries. So I'm going to be flying an S-58, a Sikorsky S-58. It was a helicopter. It was meant to take out submarines back in the 50s.
Okay.
But it's a big helicopter and it generates a lot of downwash with a rotor downwash. And so what they do is the cherries, when it rains, they get wet. And if they don't get the moisture off of the cherries will crack and ruin the whole crops. So we come in and hover over the cherries and blow dry them, literally, so that when the sun comes out, there's no moisture on them and they don't crack. And it's a huge, huge business. There's 12 helicopters running out of this place at $1,000 an hour. And this is what these farmers will pay to save their crops. Because otherwise, if they lose those crops, they're out, you know, millions and millions of dollars.
All right. Maybe this is a silly question. Before you got your helicopter license, did you know anything about that?
Nothing.
Okay. Because I was like, wow, that's amazing.
You know, I think a lot of people thought that the pandemic was a chance to do, you know, a little bit of a reset button. You know, I know a lot of people are like, all right, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to change my career. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And most people ended up just bumping around the internet most of the time and like going into negative, deep, dark holes. And we're now just finally starting to come out of that. But to me, I took it as an opportunity to say, all right, I don't have an acting business to do right now. It's the first time in 30 years. I can't go to work. I'm not allowed to go to work. I can't just stay home and feel sorry for myself. I need to do something. The gyms were closed, so I couldn't go train and fight and grapple and the stuff that I like to do. Couldn't even go work out in the gym. They closed the beaches for a while. We couldn't surf. So I decided to focus on flying helicopters and doing math and physics and all these things that I tried to avoid when I was a kid growing up. Now it's like part of my daily life. And
Bravo.
I was taken to it. And, you know, the goal was to start getting paid, not to keep paying for it. And now I have my first paying job coming up. So I'm pretty excited about it.
That's amazing. Bravo.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Bravo. All My Children came calling. The character of Michael Delaney. When you took the part, did you know he would be coming out of the closet?
No. Alan, you'll love this story. This is such a classic me, and the universe gives you what you need. So I had auditioned for it, and again, I wasn't all that excited to go back to a soap because when I finished Another World, I was like, all right, I'm going to Los Angeles, and I'm going to go get that series that they owe me out there. And I came out here for a year and a half and just got my butt kicked. And I called my agent. I'm like, you know what? I'm starting to run out of cash. And he's like, all right, I'll make the phone calls. And, you know, if you can open yourself back up to the soap world, you know, you probably have a home somewhere. Somebody will watch, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up auditioning for All My Children. I had to fly back and screen test. I came back to LA, and a buddy of mine, we went to Disneyland that night. He's like, we're going to go with my friend Deb, happened to be Debbie Gibson. So we went and had a great time. We rode Space Mountain together and everything. We exchanged phone numbers. No cell phones back then. And she's like, well, I'm going back to New York tomorrow. If you're ever in New York, give me a call. And I was like, okay. I got home and there were 15 messages on my answering machine from my agent, my manager, everybody saying, Chris, you need to call us right away. You're like, you got the job on All My Children. You're on a 9:30 a.m. flight tomorrow morning. It was 2 o'clock when I got home. And I was like, you're kidding me. I was like, holy crap. So I packed everything I could into a bag, jumped on a plane, got picked up by a limo, and the limo driver says, oh, by the way, production wants to see you quickly before you go to your hotel room. They just want to discuss a few things with you. I was like, okay, no problem. They take me into the studio. It was Felicia Minnie Bear.
Yeah.
She was the exec producer at the time. And she was like, yeah, you know, we're going to do something with your character that's never been done on daytime TV before. And it was like my heart dropped because I was like, oh my God, I know what they're going to tell me. Why is this happening to me right now? I was all excited to come to New York City, make some money, be back on a soap again. And you're going to do me like this? Really? And they said, listen, we have a second choice, but we saw, you know, between the tapes and everything else, almost 5,000 people for this. And we felt that you were the most comfortable in your own skin. And we wanted to break down stereotypes of what your gay man is. And we're going to set up the audience. They're not going to know it for 6 months. We're going to play it straight, if you will. Having them think that you're going to get together with Dixie or whatever. And then you realize that we're going to pull the carpet out from underneath everybody. And once they've already liked you and welcomed you into their homes, that's where we're going to pull out. And they were like, you know, take an hour or two to think about it if you want, but we really, really would like you to do this. And, you know, so I called Alicia Coppola, who is my ex-girlfriend, who still keep in touch with her to this day. Fantastic woman.
I had her on my show. I didn't know her before. I loved her.
Oh, really? She's so awesome.
Yeah.
And her husband, Anthony's amazing anyway. But I called her and I was like, what do I do? She goes, don't be an a-hole. She's like, actors kill for roles like this. Are you kidding me? Grow a pair and do it. And I was like, okay. So I did. And I learned so much through that. And you have to realize it was in 1995. I got death threats from the, you know, Christian right, conservative right, people saying you're going to burn in hell for what you're doing. And, you know, this is an abomination for human beings, you know, and I just thought, wow, all this like negativity and meanness being sent my direction. And I got such mostly support from the gay community, but there were people that were like, why did you hire a gay person to play this role? You know, they felt like, you know, you couldn't have hired somebody that's gay to do it. But I would never state my own sexuality in interviews or anything else, because I thought it defeated the purpose of what I was trying to do, which was people are born the way that they're born. It's not a choice. It's an orientation. You can't change that the way that I wouldn't want to change my sexual orientation either. And I got so much support from the gay community. I would get stopped on the street by people on a daily basis saying, thank you. You saved my life. I couldn't come out to my parents. I couldn't tell them, and I felt suicidal. I didn't feel like it was something that, society around me could handle. And because of your courage and what you're doing, we feel that I was, courageous enough to come out to my family. And it was a lot. It was a lot for me to handle. I was 28 years old at the time, from a small town in Connecticut. But again, I grew up around the gay community, and I was like, all right, if I'm the one that's going to carry this torch, I'll do it. Well, and then 20 years later, to be on the Fosters playing the dad that doesn't get it, to the two boys are trying to get together with beard girlfriends and trying to find their own, identity.
Yeah.
And then suddenly to get fan mail from people, leave those kids alone, let them be who they are. And I'm like, we did it. 20 years later, here we are.
Really, abso-effing-lutely. You really should be, it takes storytelling to open people's hearts and minds. And, Felicia and Agnes, I assume Agnes, I'm not sure who was writing it at the time.
Agnes Nixon, yeah. She was the, Felicia was the executive, but Agnes was the creator. And this was Agnes's story that she really wanted to tell. And, I felt the responsibility to tell that story properly,
But I love that. You think of where Michael Delaney was and where your character as a father on the Fosters and the, the difference in the reaction, really for you as an actor must be mind blowing, because it really, you can see how far how far we have come. I mean, there are still, what the BS going on in Florida and stuff.
Well, that's what's so crazy, right? Is you think, okay, here we are, we've arrived. I thought it when we had Barack as president, like, oh my God, we finally grew up as a country, here we are, and then to see like how far we swung the other direction. And the crazy thing is, I'll just throw this in there as one last thing. Donald Trump was my first baseman. For 3 years, we had a team called the Hollywood All-Stars. It was a softball team, not baseball. I played baseball, so softball was like easy to me. It was like putting it on a tee. And we would play a 7-inning game before the major league games. And Trump was our first baseman. I played shortstop. Mark Consuelos played third. Meatloaf was our pitcher.
Oh, wow.
And it was like we would travel around with these celebrities. And I just thought like, oh, wow. And I would see him at like the functions with the Clintons, and he would give to the, the Clinton Foundation and the Democrat and the DNC and everything. And I was like, what happened to this guy? How did he go so far this other direction from a guy that I knew? And now the whole country is feeling this like new courage to, suddenly change everything, to go back to, kind of this kind of white power kind of thing where I'm like, how did we get so lost in such a short time when we had made such progress in, that at least I thought. And, I feel like I just don't know if anybody in government is really representing us as a community anymore. Meaning, when I sit around a table and talk about people's needs, I don't think the Republican Party's doing it. And the Democratic Party's now been in power for almost 2 years, hasn't been able to get anything done either. So I'm like, we need to really think, about who we put into office to represent us as people. And I just mean us individually, because we are individuals.
Us individually, absolutely.
I wear American flags all over the place. Everybody's like, oh, and some woman's like, oh, I like your mask. I said, oh, thanks. She goes, I wear American flag mask. And she goes, so you lost. I said, lost what? She said, the election. And I said, what do you mean? Joe Biden won. I said, she goes, oh, I just assumed. I said, no, the last time I checked, we're all Americans. We're supposed to disagree on stuff. We're not.
Absolutely. We put the flag up as well. I have a gay pride flag up. I have an American. Absolutely.
That's what I believe in, is that we're supposed to have our individuality. We're supposed to not get along with everything, but to respectfully disagree. And we don't have those conversations anymore.
Right.
And people are literally in office because they've, tweeted some vile stuff, and everybody goes, yeah, I feel like that too. And now they're in power and they're in the House of Representatives,
Yeah, it's
So
just
I'm kind of
divided.
blown away by our politics these days, and
Oh,
hopefully,
I
get
am
back to,
too. I
having
mean,
differences of opinion, having parties that represent all of us, not just,
get
not
along,
just
get along.
themselves and keeping themselves in power is what it feels like.
It's we should all get along, and this
Can you hear me,
Florida
Alan? Do I
thing.
still have you?
Yeah, you do. Can you hear me?
Shoot, why am I not hearing you?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
I think somebody tried to call in. What do I do here?
Sign
Can you
back
still hear
in.
me?
I can.
No.
Sign back in.
Shoot. No.
Can you
No.
sign back in?
No sound still?
No sound.
I don't know what to do. Okay. Sign back in. All right, let me try.
He's going to sign back in. DG, you really are not welcome calling homosexual a perversion of nature during my show. I am a gay man, proud of it. I am the host of this show. I am proud to be a gay man. You do not belong watching this show if you speak to me and the folks watching my show in such a way. Take yourself off this channel, please.
Do I have you back?
You have me back.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I was like, I don't know what to do. I can see your mouth moving, but I can't do anything.
I am actually, sadly, going to block a user from my channel right now who is talking about homosexuality as a perversion.
Really?
Oh, yes.
See, it still continues, right? To this day, it still continues.
It still continues, but I really wanted to read a message I got earlier today about you being here. Todd said, I recently rewatched the Michael Delaney story and found myself very humbled by how ahead of itself it was for daytime television. Every actor involved brought their very best performance to the story, especially Chris and the late Ben Jorgensen. I was only out myself for 2 years when the storyline debuted, and revisiting it made me realize how different the times were and how very raw the subject matter was for not just society, but myself included. I wanted to thank Mr. Bruno for his commitment to the material, but the class that he showed by allowing himself to be the face of adversity at a time when being stigmatized was at utmost risk.
Wow, that means a lot to me. It's, you think about all these years later of having that role and like being a kid from Connecticut and like having that on my shoulders and remember the fear and not wanting to do it at first, just having that reaction. And but that's also what I bring into life. If I have the fear of something, I realize I must probably need to do this because it's going to be good for me in the long run. And again, it's compassion for your fellow man. I think people that don't understand it are afraid of it. They think that it's going to rub off on them or rub off on their kid or something like that. Instead, to me, when in the state of California, when my gay friends were able to get married for the first time and live in peace and have the same benefits that the rest of us do, it warmed my heart in a way where I was like, but I get, trying to explain this to the NASCAR crowd, and again, I'm stereotyping, of course, but I think it's the same thing with the trans movement now. People gave David Chappelle a lot of shit. Pardon my expression, but we're talking real stuff here, and I think people didn't watch the whole thing and realize that he was trying to get his head around something and prejudice that is pervasive throughout society in many different ways. But to some of us, we have to be spoon-fed a little bit more the understanding, and that comes from conversation, right? It comes from understanding that people that are gay are not pedophiles. Pedophiles are actually people that think that they're straight, and their sickness takes them to doing these things, having power over children. It's not even a sexuality. And then that's the thing, is that it's surprising to me that people are that uneducated about it when it's around them everywhere, whether they realize it or not, you know. And I'm just blown away by the fact that people still don't understand it. And if you don't understand it, why not have a conversation about it? Try and learn about it instead of just, you know, I think that, you know, we still have a long way to go with a lot.
We really do. I really, you know, I try to answer fans when they're writing during the show, and I just happened to notice that person was really being vile. And I, you know, while you were off screen, I basically just said, you know, I'm a gay man, you know, for you to be talking about that during my show, you know, see you later. You know, like there's no people need to be educated. People, you know,
but you know, it would be interesting,
or just have compassion.
You know, it would be interesting to me, Alan, though, this is the problem, right? Because he's just firing something off and there's no consequence. He doesn't have to look you in the face. He doesn't have to look me in the face. He doesn't have to go, I'm sorry, what'd you just say? You know, and have a conversation. Bring him onto the show. That's the thing, is that one thing that I do feel that we need to do more of is to hear one another, to not cancel each other, to not go, oh my God, that's awful, we can't hear that. I get it. When it was the president of the United States, you know, throwing out this kind of vile stuff, you go, all right, we got to do something about this. Yes, we have freedom of speech, but people are listening to this and reacting to it, and, you know, it's dictating policy now. But if
but you said it right. They were reacting to it. Like, you know, an actress who was on Guiding Light, her daughter is 15 years old and an adopted Asian child who was attacked at a Lowe's department store because of that vile nonsense about, you know, the COVID virus, you know, calling it a different name, you know, it just, you know, words matter, right?
They really do, you know, and and we're learning it more and more, right? Because we actually have imagery of things that are actually happening, but people are denying the imagery and telling you that, no, you didn't see what you saw. This is actually what's happening. Like, oh, thank you, Tucker Carlson, for telling me what I didn't see, you know, thank you. Oh, I didn't realize that was just a bunch of peaceful people going through the Capitol and having a tour, you know. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you for that. Yeah. You know. But we aren't having conversations about it. You know, even the networks aren't bringing on people from the other party anymore and hearing, like, I don't even want to hear all that crap anymore. So we're just existing in these echo chambers where I want to hear what my right-wing friends have to say about the state. Do you believe everything that your party is putting out there right now? No, I don't believe in that. Well, okay, so we need more people that are like you, that are, you know, are reasonable and rational and can have conversations about stuff. I always believe myself to be a centrist. You know, I lean more to the left because of environmental issues, social issues, and all that, but I'm more fiscally conservative, and I've voted across party lines throughout the years. But now we've like drawn these battle lines that you're either on our team or you're not. And I'm like, that's not good for democracy. That's not good for anybody's cause. You know, I feel like this is what we need to get back to as a country, is having these conversations. I'd love to have that guy on the show and be like, explain to me why you feel that way. You know? Absolutely. And have you and I be able to say, you as a gay man, me as a straight man, say, hey, we have different perspectives on this, but why is it that you feel that way? What's going on? What happened to you in your childhood?
Well, I would love somebody to try and let me know who that was. You know, I did block because also, you know, I don't.
It's easy to do that. I do it too. I do it with friends of mine that I thought you know,
it wasn't more for me per se, but it was, you know, there's other gay people watching and those words coming up in the chat. I don't want as part of, you know, this show living online. Like, I don't want people to see that, but it would be interesting. And my God, I mean, you really must have had some really fascinating conversations during that time in the 90s of playing that character.
Yeah, it really did, you know, and it was challenging, you know, because, but I could see the baby steps, like I said, with the people around me in a blue collar neighborhood that was very new. You know, they were like, getting their heads around in a way that, like, well, if Chris has the courage to do it, maybe I shouldn't be as judgmental about this, and it was happening. I could see it. People were really, changing around me and changing their attitudes and philosophies. And over the past 20 years, from when we started that storyline to where we are now, we've seen a lot of changes, and that's kind of, what David Chappelle was trying to say in his thing is that, hey, it's going to take time. We've been doing this as Black people for 400 years.
Yeah.
This trans thing is going to take a little while for people to get their heads around and understand, we have to have more conversations about this, so.
Not everyone had a father like yours.
That's true. That's true. I was very lucky with my parents. My middle name's Malcolm. My dad was born Leroy Paul Bruno. I literally found that. I was like, Dad, you changed your name to Scott in high school? And he's like, yeah, my name was Leroy. I was like, that's awesome. So, my parents were pretty progressive, back then. But, to them, it was just common sense. Just, treat people with love and respect and kindness. That's all it is,
Amen to that. What was it like doing this story with the late Ben Jorgensen?
When I got that news about Ben, I during the last 2 years, I've lost over 13 friends. 13. Some to COVID, some to suicide. I am so sorry. And I knew that I could tell Ben was at unrest, when I knew him, and he really took over the storyline when I left, because I had a 2-year contract with all my children, and I respectfully said, listen, I want to see this storyline all the way through and see it, but I'm going to go to LA when this is over and try and pursue nighttime and movies and all that stuff. I hope you guys understand. They're like, absolutely. My mother got sick with cancer that summer that I was supposed to leave. And I said, hey, I'm still going to be in town if you guys want my services to continue. And they're like, oh, okay. So I did recurring after my contract was up that summer before I left for LA. I was fortunate that we saw the storyline through all the way, but eventually I wanted to come out here. But I remember they were like, okay, we want to continue this. And they decided to put it on Ben. It's like, okay, we're going to continue the gay storyline with your character. And again, he was having trouble. I don't know if you remember in the early days of he was like, really like, why is he gay? And I don't want my, other people around him or whatever, but he was struggling with his own sexuality is what they played with his character, which I thought was really powerful too. And so I would always follow Ben on Facebook and stuff and make little comments and stuff with each other. And I just can't tell you, like, this has been a really difficult time for people. I think the pandemic has pushed people into this kind of solitude and alone with your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions. And it's overwhelming for a lot of people. And I just think that it was just too much darkness for a lot of friends, and a couple of my friends took their own life in that list of 13 people. And, I just wish that there was better ways to communicate, to reach out. There's all these things, but people feel alone, and that's something that I think that at least with the storylines that we've done over the years, at least when it comes to the gay community, people feel, but this is Los Angeles, we celebrate, my neighbor, the Gabers, we call them, we were always like, oh, what are the Gabers doing tonight? Oh, they're having a party. Oh, sweet. It's going to be a fun one. We affectionately refer to them as the Gabers. They're like, oh, the Gabers say, please come over, and then the other set of Gabers that we have across the street, they'll invite me over and they're like, oh, can Chris come over and play? And I said, oh, that's great. I'm going to be in gay soup. That means me in the hot tub with five gay friends. I call it.
I know what the gay soup.
Come over for gay soup. And then we laugh. So
that's amazing.
There are communities that celebrate this, right? That celebrate our individuality, But again, there's individuality.
Well, speaking of that, talk about your mom.
Yeah, my mom. I mean, the greatest influence in my life, not to take anything away from my father, my grandparents, or anybody else, but my mother. Okay, this is another thing. I've talked to my gay friends too about the whole trans thing, and some of them are like, yeah, I mean, we support it because we're all under the same umbrella, but we don't necessarily get it because we feel that there's male and female in all of us, right? The yin and the yang, we have that. And I say, God, that is so interesting to me because my mother, I tell everybody I got my masculine qualities from my mother and my more sensitive stuff from my dad, who was into the opera and the ballet and poetry, whereas my mother was like with nails, like building something in the backyard, boom, boom, crack, like breaking down gender identities in a lot of ways. My mother was teaching me to throw a curveball and, coaching my baseball team, So I always say that, my mother was ahead of her time. She had us recycling when we were kids. She would gather all the bottles and we would take them to the recycling center, and she'd get all the kids in the neighborhood to go. And basically she would say, okay, everybody. And on the count of 3, 2, 1, and we would just break the bottles against the wall. So everybody's like, hey, let's go with Mrs. Bruno and we'll go break bottles against the wall. She lets us do it. And so that was how she would get everybody into recycling. But we were doing this and we were composting. I'm like, why can't we just throw the garbage out like the neighbors do? She's like, you don't understand. This earth is a very small little place. And, we have to treat it with respect. And so she instilled all those things in me at a very, very young age. And me and my brother, and she was really ahead of her time. She was doing all these things in her community, and I was like, why don't you run for office, Ma? She's like, that's too much work. I'm like, well, you're doing all the work running around saving all the trees, the old growth trees that were in our neighborhood that they're going to knock down to build a Walmart. She'd be like, that tree's 300 years old, and what that tree is seen. And so she would all right, the mayor would be like, okay, well, what do you want to do with the tree? She's like, leave it there, build it around it, make it a little park or something, and they'd be like, okay, we'll do it.
She's the best. So
she was quite a trip, and she died 16 years ago, and I still miss her every day. And
wow, it's 15 years next month for my mom.
Really? Doesn't it feels like BC and AD? Like my life is up until the day my mother died. Now it's a completely different life living without her. It's the way that I feel, and I miss her all the time. But I see elements of her in my wife, and I'm like, she's deaf in the same damn ear and everything. And I'm like, what the hell? Ball busters, And I was like, I don't know if I would have met you if my mom was still alive, because there's like an element of her in my wife.
I absolutely kind of agree. I met my husband 2 months after.
Really?
Wow. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's really wild. And I'm sure there's elements of him that your mother had that
probably
same type of.
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy. Chris, such. Loved chatting with you. So glad Susan connected us.
Yeah, that was awesome that she did. It was great to hear from her. And I was like, oh man, I always love doing interviews, and especially when it comes to soaps, because that's how I started out. And it's kind of like our home, where
like you said, the pandemic, this show wouldn't exist if the pandemic hadn't happened.
Right.
I started it about 2 weeks after, what lockdown began, just on a whim. And here we are 270 shows later.
Oh my God. Well, that's fantastic. Well, listen, I thank you for having me on. Thank you to your audience for listening to me. And even if you don't agree with some of the things that I said or whatever, we're having conversations. And I think that's what's really important right now.
I completely agree. That's something I really didn't know. Like, this was started as an interview, but no matter what the interview is, an actor, an author, something about social relevant conversations, we all can learn from conversation.
Absolutely. Well,
have an amazing time on your helicopter trip.
Thank you.
Helicopter job.
The next time you eat cherries, think that somebody flew a helicopter over those things to dry them out so you could eat them.
Hovered over them.
That's right. Exactly.
I will eat them with new respect.
Absolutely.
Have a great weekend. Thanks so much, Chris.
You too, Alan. Thanks a lot. Okay. I'll talk soon.
You got it. Bye-bye. That was incredible. Thank you, Chris Bruno. Thank you, Susan Eisenberg, for setting that up. Join me next Wednesday when actor Dan Payne, who has appeared in numerous movies, Disney's Descendants, The Mighty Ducks. He has a new movie with Bruce Willis coming out. He will be here live with me next Wednesday. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And please check out thelockerroom.com. And everybody have a great weekend. Stay safe and just be kind to one another.